Wagner was considered one of the most dangerous criminals in the United States during the 1920s through the 1950s. His story hit all of the newspapers during that time in the entire nation. There were 3 ballads that were recorded about Kinnie Wagner and sold nationally between the years of 1926 to 1930. Known as a crack shot, the Find a Grave website states, quote, "It was said that he could toss 5 walnuts into the air, draw his .38 caliber pistols, and shoot all of them in the air. Wagner never aimed his firearms. He just shot instinctively," unquote. Hoover's G-men would capture Wagner in 1943, but after his escape from the Parchman prison in 1948, they refused to help in his recapture. However, he would be recaptured and would serve out his remaining years in the Parchman prison, dying of a heart attack in 1958. Prepare yourself for a wild ride through petty larceny, moonshining, murders, captures, bank and train robberies, trials, and escapes. Wagner would be responsible for the deaths of 5 to 6 men. He would be convicted for the murder of 5 of them. This will be a 2-part series as there is a lot to cover with his life of crimes. Come along with us as we walk through the life of Kinnie Wagner. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. The early years. Born on February the 18th, 1903 in Scott County, Virginia, to Charles Monroe and Nancy Jane Penley Wagner. His siblings were Lakey Bell Wagner, 1894 to 1971, Oscar Leonard Wagner, 1898 to 1984, Fred Kelsey Wagner, 1905 to 1960, Ollie Wagner Cunningham, 1907 to 1995, and half-sibling Lily Bell Wagner Adams, 1913 to 2014. At the age of 14, some sources say 16, Wagner left home and joined the Richard Brothers Circus. His talent was being a trick shot artist. He was also billed as a bronco buster rider that could tame any horse. Wagner would leave the circus in 1924 in Meridian, Mississippi. He would take on work at a lumber company there. We could not find out which company, but several newspapers do mention that he was employed with one of them. When Prohibition was passed, he made and sold moonshine to make extra money. It is thought that he could have possibly been in the moonshine business with a deputy sheriff. Now, according to the Stories of Appalachia podcast, Kinnie Wagner says that he was hired as a runner for moonshine by the deputy sheriff officer. However, the FBI showed up to investigate moonshining in the area. This is where things turned south for Wagner. First known arrest, escape, and murder. The deputy sheriff became nervous that the FBI would find out about Wagner. He was afraid that Wagner would turn informant and that the business would end with his career in a jail cell. To remedy this potential situation, the deputy came up with a plan. On October 8, 1924, Wagner was arrested in Louisville, Mississippi, for stealing a watch and possibly money. It is said that the deputy sheriff gave Wagner the watch and money to keep for a friend. He was being held in the Greene County Jail at a place called Leakesville, Mississippi, on a charge of petty larceny. Just a month later, on November 11th, Wagner escapes from the jail. Now this seems strange, because petty larceny only holds a 6-month jail term. And with good behavior, a person would not have to spend that entire time in jail. However, Wagner now feared for his life under the custody of the deputy sheriff, and so he made good his escape. According to the Waterbury Democrat in the November 18, 1940 edition, quote, Wagner first earned immortality in a song among the Tennessee hillbillies by shooting 2 peace officers. He had practiced for this feat by running away from his Virginia home and joining a circus, where he became a crack shot. He left a circus at Meridian, Mississippi in 1924, and while working at lumbering found himself in the Lucedale jail for petty larceny. He obtained a saw, cut his cell bars, slugged the jailer who was bringing him breakfast, and escaped. Unquote. According to the Wikipedia source, while awaiting his trial for petty larceny, Wagner overpowered the jailer and stole a horse on his way out. The murder of Murdock McIntosh. Wagner fled to a shack in the woods near McLean, where he hid out for nearly a month after his escape. A posse of sheriff's deputies would hunt him down and find his hideout. It would not end well. According to the Webb article, Kinnie Wagner timeline, December 24, 1924, Christmas Eve. Wagner kills Greene County Sheriff Deputy Murdock McIntosh in a gun battle with McIntosh and other officers. McIntosh was buried Christmas Day. Wagner headed back to the northeast Tennessee and southwest Virginia area. Kinnie Wagner would face a jury on these charges beginning on September 14, 1926. We will cover the trial which goes into the shootout in more detail in the second part. In the meantime, he would be a hard person to catch. For 4 months, the whereabouts of Wagner would be unknown. He proved to be elusive, as he was spotted in several places over that time, but would not stay in the area long enough to be captured. In truth, Wagner was making his way back to the Virginia mountains through the state of Tennessee. He would make it as far as Kingsport before his fortune was soon to change, as 2 more police officers would die at his hands. Second known arrest attempt, murder, conviction, and escape. On April 13, 1925, Wagner made it as far as Kingsport, Tennessee, where he met up with his sister and some friends at the Long Island of the South Fork of the Holston River. They were holding a picnic there the day after Easter to welcome him home again when he was spotted. According to the Waterbury Democrat, in the November 18, 1940, the officers were answering a complaint of a disturbance in the area. Kingsport Police Officer John Smith, Sullivan County Deputy Sheriff Hubert Webb, and Officer George Frazier were together in the deadly task of trying to capture Wagner. It did not end well for them, as Smith, Webb, and Frazier were riddled with bullets from Wagner's gun. Only Frazier survived the melee, even though he was severely wounded. In some newspaper sources, Frazier died, and in others he survived. Wagner would flee on horseback and find himself in Waycross, Virginia. This would be a 7.5-mile journey on horseback. The Webb article tells us what happened while he was there. According to the Webb article, Kinnie Wagner timeline on April 14, 1925, after talking with widow W.S. Rhodes on the night before, sleeping in her barn, and again talking with her that morning, Wagner turns himself in to Dr. Poe at the store near Waycross, Virginia. Subsequently, taken to the Sullivan County Jail in Blountville, en route to Kingsport, the car in which he was riding was rammed by a car of deputies. Unquote. Oh, the court was not going to take a long time to bring Wagner to trial over his notoriety for escaping custody. They housed him in jail over in Blountville, Tennessee, and the trial began a week later on April 21, 1925. According to the Evening Star on April 25, 1925, quote, murder in the first degree, slayer of deputy sheriff and policeman is convicted. By Associated Press, Blountville, Tennessee. Kinnie Wagner was found guilty of first-degree murder by a jury in Sullivan County Circuit Court here this morning in connection with the deaths of Deputy Sheriff Hubert Webb and policeman John Smith at Kingsport on April 13th. The 2 officers, members of a party of 5 who sought to arrest Wagner on a charge of murdering a deputy sheriff in Mississippi on last Christmas Eve, were shot to death when they encountered the former circus rider near a riverbank. Another officer was seriously wounded, but is expected to recover. Unquote. According to the Webb article, Kinnie Wagner, timeline, April 26, 1925, quote, convicted of murder and sentenced to death by electrocution, but that sentence is never carried out. Wagner claims the officer shot first, but the law enforcement officials maintained he shot first, unquote. According to the Evening Star on April 26, 1925, quote, urged death for Slayer. Blountville, Tennessee, April 25th. Kinnie Wagner, 22-year-old slayer of the two Kingsport officers, will die in the electric chair if the will of a jury in the Sullivan County Circuit Court is carried out. The jury, which has been hearing Wagner's case here for the past 4 days, returned a verdict today, finding Wagner guilty of first-degree murder and recommending that he be electrocuted. The defense counsel has announced that if their motion for a new trial is overruled, an appeal will be taken to the Supreme Court, unquote. According to the Waterbury Democrat in the November 18, 1940 edition, quote, an appeal to the Tennessee Supreme Court saved him this time, and while awaiting a new trial, Wagner improved his time by escaping from a new jail at Knoxville, unquote. Kinnie Wagner would only stay in the jail for a few months. He had a temporary escape from the county jail, but this did not last long. He didn't like the idea of execution too much, it seems. While there, he plotted a way to escape from the state prison, and on July 11th, made good on that plan. According to the Alaska Daily Empire on July 11th, 1925, quote, Kinnie Wagner, convicted of killing 2 officers, escaped from the jail last night after attacking and overpowering the jailer, guards, and 7 other prisoners. He escaped, and a posse was immediately organized to effect his capture, unquote. According to the Stories of Appalachia podcast, Wagner and 6 other men waited until the return of the work trustees from their daily shift. When the jailers opened the door for them to come back into the jailhouse, Wagner and 6 other prisoners jumped and overpowered the guards. Wagner made good his escape out of the front door. Rewards. According to the Evening Star dated July 14, 1925, there was a reward posted for the capture of Wagner. It states, quote, Wagner, still at large, $1,000 reward offered for slayer, dead or alive. Bristol, Virginia, July 14th. Kinnie Wagner, youthful convicted slayer of 2 Kingsport, Tennessee officers who led 6 fellow prisoners in a daring escape from Blountville, Tennessee jail last Friday night, is now reported to be somewhere in West Virginia, and Sheriff J.J. Thomas has wired the officials of Bluefield and other towns to keep a sharp lookout. 2 of the convicts were captured soon after their dash to liberty, but others were still at large and thought to be heavily armed. A reward of $1,000 for the apprehension of Wagner, dead or alive, was announced by Sheriff Thomas, unquote. According to the America's Time Recorder, published on September 22, 1925, quote, here is Kinnie Wagner, 20, confessed slayer of 3 officers, for whose arrest rewards totaling $2,750 have been offered. He is believed to be hiding in the hills of Bristol, Virginia. The youth twice broke jail, once after having been sentenced to death, unquote. Bank and train robbery. Wagner knew that his chances of staying free was not going to happen in the United States, so he fled to Mexico. While he was there, he continued with the life of crime and staged several bank and train robberies for which he became notorious. He would return to the United States, to the state of Oklahoma, where he would meet Amelia, quote, Emily, unquote, Hoke or Hoach. A source says that she became the love of his life, but even she could not tame his wild heart, as he would end up in the brawl near Texarkana that would kill 2 more men. In our next part, we will cover the deaths of Sam and William Carper, and the surrender to Lily Barker, and the trial of Wagner for the murder of McIntosh. We will also continue with his escapes from prison and his life as a trustee. Special hat tip. We would like to tip our hat to the YouTube channel Stories of Appalachia. Thank you, fellows, for the breakdown about Kinnie Wagner. It really helped in places where we got stuck upon his life story. We try to recognize the work that you did in places that we had trouble with. Thank you. We at Kentucky, Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky, Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history. When we last left the life of Kinnie Wagner, he had been arrested for petty larceny, had several escapes from prison, and had been on the run for murder of Mississippi police officer Murdock McIntosh. Stood trial and convicted of 2 first-degree murder charges for the deaths of Tennessee officers John Smith and Hubert Webb, and escaped state prison before he was executed. He then went to Mexico, where he was notorious for robbing banks and trains, and all of that before he turned 25 years old. All aboard the Kentucky, Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but this convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Third known arrest attempt, murder, conviction, and escape. After leaving the company of Emily Hoke on August 16, 1926, Wagner and brothers Sam, William, and Bob Carper were together at the home of Sam. Many sources say that the fight happened at a bar, and several sources state that it actually happened at the home of Sam Carper. Regardless, they were drinking and playing a card game at a party there. Evidently, a brawl between the 4 men happened over a card game, and Sam and William Carper were shot dead at the hands of Wagner. Bob Carper was severely wounded. All of the Carper men were supposedly unarmed, even though Wagner stated that they were shot in self-defense. According to the Cordell Dispatch and Daily Sentinel, located in Cordell, Georgia, on October 18, 1925, Wagner stated, quote, "I would have gotten Bob, but it was so dark I couldn't see to shoot straight," unquote. Sometime in the middle of the night, Wagner met up with Sheriff Lily Barker and her posse. Barker had become a sheriff when her husband had been killed by bootleggers. When Wagner spotted Barker, he threw up his hands in surrender and came out of the bushes in which he was hiding. He later told newspaper sources that, quote, "I don't fight against a woman," unquote. Confusion over identity. According to the newspaper Seward Daily Gateway, located in Seward, Alaska, quote, "While the authorities are reasonably sure that they are holding Kinnie Wagner, wanted in Tennessee on charges of murder, they cannot complete identification until the arrival of an officer from Bristol. An officer is en route with all necessary papers," unquote. And according to the Cordell Dispatch and Daily Sentinel, October 16, 1925, quote, "Alabama authorities believe that they have murderer wanted in 2 states. Lack of fingerprints of Kinnie Wagner, wanted for murder in Tennessee and Mississippi, hampered officials here today in an effort to identify the prisoner held at the county jail as a man wanted in 2 states," unquote. On September 1, 1926, according to the Watauga Democrat, published on September 2, 1926, Sheriff Thomas, Chief of Police Cam King of Kingsport, Creed Frazier, who was the brother of Officer George Frazier, who was wounded at Kingsport shootout, and 2 newspaper men came to Texarkana to identify Wagner. According to the same article, after finally being identified by an officer from Tennessee, Kinnie Wagner finally faced trial on August 25, 1926 at 9 a.m. for the murders of Sam and Will Carper. According to Wagner, he had shot the 2 men and wounded their brother in self-defense. Neither of the Carper brothers were considered to be upright citizens in the community. They had such a bad reputation in the area that no one really was sad at their passing. There are sources that state that Sheriff Lily Barker was in love with Wagner, and that is why she couldn't bear for him to be tried in Arkansas for murder. And other sources state that since Mississippi had the first charges of murder against him that was never tried, he needed to go there first for trial. Whatever the reason, he was transferred to Mississippi to face charges for murder of McIntosh. The trial for the McIntosh murder. We have several accounts as to how this trial went. It is also widely thought that McIntosh was the deputy sheriff that framed Wagner and had him put in jail to hide his participation in the moonshining business. According to the Evening Star on September 14, 1926, quote, Leakesville, Mississippi, September 14th, Kinnie Wagner, notorious jailbreaker and alleged slayer of 5 men, went on trial here today on the charge of murdering Murdock McIntosh, a Greene County deputy sheriff. The state is expected to contend that Wagner shot and fatally wounded McIntosh on December 24, 1924, when an officer attempted to remove him from the house where he had hidden to escape arrest for the jailbreaking. He had been arrested on a charge of larceny, unquote. According to the Brownsville Herald on October 29, 1926, C.T. McLeod, former sheriff of George County, testified that Wagner told him that if he testified against him in this case, that he would settle up with the sheriff once he got out of prison. On cross-examination, it was discovered that Wagner said that he would run against him for sheriff of the county. W.J. Turner, sheriff of Greene County, who testified that he saw the death of McIntosh. In his testimony, Turner said that he had saw Wagner perform in circuses and later working for a lumber company in the area. About 3 weeks later, Sheriff McLeod told Turner that Wagner had escaped from jail and that he needed his help for his capture. He also testified that he was informed by telephone conversation with McLeod of Wagner's whereabouts. According to Turner, on the morning of December 24, 1924, McIntosh, Turner, W.E. Denham, and Waldo Freeman all went to the residence to arrest Wagner. Denham and Turner went to the front of the house, and McIntosh and Freeman went to the back door. A man was heard snoring in the house. Turner called out and said, quote, Kenny, get up, it's Sheriff Turner, unquote. He said that he was standing at the corner of the house when Wagner shot McIntosh, that the deputy did not have time to raise his gun. After McIntosh was shot, the order was given, and all of the remaining men opened up fire upon the house. Turner testified that he shot 3 times in the house and twice when the man in the house ran outside. Turner states that McIntosh was killed before anyone opened fire on the house. Turner was satisfied that Wagner was the only person occupying the house at the time. According to the Evening Star on September 15, 1926, quote, examination of more than a score of witnesses to determine whether Kinnie Wagner, a former circus trick shot expert, could obtain a fair trial in Greene County, where he is charged with the murder of Deputy Sheriff Murdock McIntosh on December 24, 1924, consumed the entire afternoon session of court here yesterday. The grand jury within 30 minutes returned a true bill, charging him with first-degree murder. His attorneys immediately filed for a petition of change of venue, contending that he could not obtain an impartial trial in Greene County, unquote. Sentence and escape attempts. According to the Waterbury Democrat, November 18, 1940, quote, that October, again for murder, but the jury could not bear to give the death penalty to such a heroic figure, and the judge imposed a life sentence. On the way to Parchman, Mississippi Penitentiary, Wagner tried again to escape, but missed, and the following year tried again to escape by beating a guard, grabbing his rifle, and shooting another guard. Confronted by a third guard with the fine bead on his forehead, Wagner surrendered, unquote. Trustee. On October 27th, Wagner became a trustee for the prison. He had made plans for an escape this time, but was foiled by an informant. In 1937, it is thought by Wikipedia and Stories of Appalachia that during this escape attempt that he had been using his time as a trustee to train the hound dogs of the prison to use to track escapees. Wagner was so trusted by the guards that he was allowed to have his own horse and carry a gun. In the meantime, however, he was also training the hound dogs to not chase his scent. He would do this by being mean to the dogs each time they followed him around. When he felt confident enough that the dogs would not give chase, that he himself escaped into the woods. For 3 years no sign of Wagner had appeared. This, however, would change. FBI goes on the chase. According to the Waterbury Democrat, November 18, 1940, quote, in 1940, after 14 years in Parchman, he again escaped. He had become a guard, and while tracking down an escapee, decided to take to the woods himself, unquote. At that time, Mr. Fortenberry was working in the Jackson FBI office. Word came back that Wagner had been in Virginia near the mountain town of Gate City. Mr. Fortenberry was sent to investigate. The FBI was interested because Wagner had broken 2 federal laws in his escape. He had kidnapped a guard and had, of course, failed to notify his draft board of his change of address. In April of 1943, Mr. Fortenberry, 2 other FBI agents, and a Virginia state trooper were seated in a parked car in Gate City. One of them spotted Wagner riding through town as a passenger in an old automobile. The officers followed and forced the car to stop about 6 miles from town. Wagner leaped from the car, was unharmed by shots fired at the officers, and hid in the tall grass of a gully. After several blasts from a machine gun had stabbed into the grass, Wagner surrendered. As he was handcuffed, he stood watching as the officers found in the car 4 revolvers, 2 rifles, and a pile of ammunition. The driver, a distant relative of Wagner's, was absolved, unquote. Last escape. In 1948, again Wagner was trusted with the bloodhounds. Once again, using the same methods as before, he would train the dogs to chase everyone but himself. Once again, Wagner waited until his dogs were trained, and then he walked out of the prison walls. He remained at large in Wahalak, Mississippi for several years. He went under the alias Big Jim. For this escape, he was placed on America's top 10 most wanted list. However, the FBI were not actively looking for his whereabouts. Capture and death. A jealous rival for the affections of a lady informed the town's law enforcement of Wagner's whereabouts and alias. He was found at the house of the female friend in 1956. By this time, Wagner was seriously ill, and he had stated, quote, I am very happy to be going back to Parchman, unquote. He died there of a heart attack at the age of 55 on March 9, 1958, in Parchman Prison, Sunflower County, Mississippi. Kinnie's body was taken to Scott County Funeral Home in Weber City, Virginia, where there were 15,000 people in attendance. Kinnie was laid to rest at Mountain View School Cemetery in Gate City, Virginia on March 12, 1958. Wagner in popular culture. 3 ballads were written and became very popular between the years of 1926 and 1930 concerning Wagner. The Ballad of Kinnie Wagner, which can be found on YouTube by Tim Stafford and Tom Jults. Another ballad is Kinnie Wagner's Surrender by Vernon Dalhart. And the last is The Fate of Kinnie Wagner by L. Craver, Vernon Dalhart. Wagner was also featured in several comics, pulp magazines, and books. He cut a very heroic figure to many as the anti-hero of the South, and was chivalrous to women, kind and generous to others, and a very free desperado that got on the wrong side of the law over reasons that was no fault of his own. As we have tried to state with all of our outlaws of history, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. While it can be honestly said that many law enforcement agencies were corrupt in those time periods, it can also be said that the people deemed as outlaws reacted badly to the situation. As always, we leave it up to you as the silent juror of history to make up your own mind about the people in these stories. Special hat tip. We would like to tip our hat to the YouTube channel Stories of Appalachia. Thank you, fellows, for the breakdown about Kinnie Wagner. It really helped in places that we were stuck upon his story. We tried to recognize the work that you did in the places that we had trouble with. Thank you. We at Kentucky, Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notifications. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky, Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.